if the Germans still held the surrounding areas here. So that was the intent, was to get Antwerp and to deny the Allies access to that here. The Fifth Army was to protect the southern flank of the army there, and the Seventh Army would worry about forces to the south, including Bastogne in this area here. This is a better shot of that. 6th Panzer Army up here just north of Brussels. The Moose River is here. 5th Panzer Army, 7th here through Bastogne. Those were the objectives of the fight. Okay. This is a graphic that shows where the front line was on various days. Here, initially on the 16th of December, the front lines were roughly here. On the 22nd or so, the lines were here, although Bastogne was not captured. There was an island here. And eventually, on the 24th, it came all the way over here. So they were very successful. There was confusion on the front lines. One of the problems was the communication that we don't have today here. So Eisenhower thought that this was just a feint. They weren't really going to launch a full-scale attack. They didn't have the resources. It was the wrong time of year, heavily clouded and so on. But they did. Okay. Along with the 6th Army, there was an operation called Operation Grief or Griffin. That's that mythological lion-like figure that you see. Hitler had his favorite commando named Otto Skorzeny here. Skorzeny had rescued Mussolini from the partisans here several months before. He was known to be fierce. He was feared by the Allies. And his job was to get a group of 1,500 volunteers, English-speaking volunteers, from the German army. They would dress them in American and Allied uniforms. They had captured American tanks and jeeps and half-tracks, and the idea was to penetrate Allied lines, blow up bridges, sow confusion. They even plotted to kill Eisenhower here. So Eisenhower spent part of the war in a bunker in his headquarters at Vichy, and there was a young captain who looked just like Eisenhower. They dressed him up as Eisenhower and they rode him around in a jeep. So if anybody was going to be killed, it was going to be this poor guy. I'm not sure that was good duty over here. Now, problem was that the Geneva Convention prohibits you from fighting in the enemy's uniforms here. So they did that, and unfortunately there was no protection as a prisoner of war then, because that's unfair fighting if there is such a thing like that here. So they were unable to succeed. The Allies quickly caught on. If there would be a English-speaking team coming by in a jeep, they would ask, "What state are you from?" And the guy'd say, "Iowa." Says, "Well, what river forms the eastern border, or what's the baseball team in this area?" So they asked questions only real Americans would know here. And so they were able to capture these people. They went and shot a lot of them here. During the Nuremberg trials, Skorzeny got off because the argument was that Americans had done the same thing in earlier times. Not quite to this extent, but they hung many of the other combatants there, but his argument held. Here's Skorzeny. He's got a scar from an earlier battle there. This is not an American tank. Hitler had promised a lot of materiel, the uniforms and the supplies and all that, which he wasn't able to deliver because he was delusional, Hitler, by this time. So what they had to do is they took some German tanks and they disguised them as American tanks and other vehicles. So this all led to the ruse. Okay. One of the main allies of the Germans were the Japanese. And they had the ambassador from Japan, ambassador to Germany in Berlin, sat down with Hitler and they talked, and the ambassador said, "Gee, your war seems to be stalled. You know, the Germans again were running out of people, running out of supplies, and so on. And he says, well, he trusted Oshima. He says, well, we're gonna mount a major offensive no earlier than November of this year, 1944. And Oshima went back to his diplomatic quarters, and he sent a message back to Tokyo saying, hey, the Germans will be attacking here sometime this year. Now, the Allies were able to break that code, so they were forewarned that there was going to be a major offensive. But again, they didn't believe it, they didn't listen to it, and so it turned out to be quite a surprise. Patton, you'll see throughout this, he's a commanding general of the Third Army. Got in trouble lots of times. The famous episode where he slapped a soldier for malingering and so on. And a famous quote, the object of a war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his here. So, but a very, very good soldier. Here, he had a dog, pit bull, that he kept with him all the time during the war. So they really didn't expect anything to happen over the Christmas. Okay, this is the Allied command staff. This is Patton over here. This is the replacement for Montgomery, who was home in London visiting with his son. This is Bradley over here and several others. But they posed for this picture around Christmas time, and nobody thought anything was going to happen. It was a time of recuperation, replenishing supplies, fixing equipment, and so on. This was a Christmas card that Patton sent to his troops, and it's dated December 14th, 1944. This is 2 days before the offensive took place, under the cover of darkness, early in the morning. This is what the conditions were like. You couldn't dig into this. This was the front line here. You can see the little caricature of Hitler here. They hold this up and try to get the bad guys to shoot so they knew where they were and they could shoot back at them over here. But imagine having to fight a battle under those conditions here. Frozen ground, lack of supplies. You couldn't get supplies in there because of the mud and the poor roads. Here, they had to dig these trenches, very shallow trenches, between all the tree roots and the rocks and everything else in there. So extremely tough fighting. Okay, and here they are marching behind the tanks. What they would often do is cut these trees down and make barriers across, and then they would either booby trap them or wire them together so that they'd have a great difficulty in removing them. So the original plan was for Hitler's armies to cross the Moose River and to get all the way up here to Antwerp. The canal extends the navigable waterways, not quite to Aachen, which has been captured or destroyed basically by the Allies by this time here. So this was the main thrust. Essentially, this is Namur here. You can see it there. This is Namur here. So basically, they got just about this far before Eisenhower got Montgomery's help, came from the north, and started to push the Germans back here over the Christmas holidays into January. Patton came up from the south, were finally able to liberate Bastogne, and he continued to push the Germans all the way back across the Rhine River here. So that was one of his major accomplishments there. Okay, the deepest penetration here, these were the armies here, the 6th Army in the north here, the 5th over here, and then the 7th down to the south toward Luxembourg there, here. So they weren't able to get to Antwerp at all, and they just barely got to the Moose River here, which was incredibly important because if these bridges were destroyed, that would have stopped the advance entirely. Here, on this side, you can see the 3 different dates here. These were the front lines. the darkest color here, on the 15th of December. This was the 20th of December, and then by the 24th of December was all the way over here, again up roughly to the Moose River there. So surprise helped quite a bit, but in the end the Germans were just overwhelmed by the force of the Allied forces coming in. There. So Eisenhower had sent the 101st Airborne and the 10th Armored Division into Bastogne to hold it. They were surrounded by the Germans here, and I said previously here that the Germans tried to get them to surrender, but McAuliffe and his men weren't willing to do that. Patton's Third Army, two of the units of the Third Army were the 4th Armored Division here. The 10th was already in here. The 4th Armored Division was coming. Combat Command B attacked along this line toward Bouman here. This is Bastogne. And Combat Command A, all segments of Patton's Third Army came through here and eventually overwhelmed the Germans, who then had to retreat. Okay, this is from December the 19th, and now the people were realizing that this was a serious offense and it wasn't just a feint. You probably can't read it from there, but here's a Merry Christmas letter from Anthony McAuliffe, the commanding general of the 101st Airborne Division over here. And it says, "What's merry about all this, you ask?" This is on Christmas Eve, December 1944. It's cold, we're not home, all those things. And he was very upfront with his troops. I'm going to read this to you here. To the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. Here, the fortune of war is changing. So the Germans are trying to convince the Americans, the Allies, to surrender here. Bastogne, areas near Bastogne have been encircled by strong German armored units. More German armored units have crossed the river Orta near Orthouville, and they've taken different various towns in the area there. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation here. This is the honorable surrender of the encircled town. In order to think it over, a term of 2 hours will be granted. Now this brings to mind a little bit what we had right here in Newburgh during the Civil War, where the Confederates came over with the white flag and said, if you look across the river, you see the cannons, and you've got till sundown to surrender the town. In this case, however, the Americans didn't surrender the town of Bastogne. They went on to fight and eventually to win over here. But again, the commander was very upfront with his troops, and then he told them at the end, you know, nuts, we're not going to surrender, just keep it up. And fortunately, the weather cleared, and Patton was able to get his troops in there and to save Bastogne. Okay, this is what the counteroffensive looked like, counteroffensive under Bastogne here on the 26th of December through the Ardennes forest. Here's Bastogne here, here's St. Vit. Again, all of the roads in this very rugged and heavily forested area went through these two towns here, so they were critical to both sides. Here, the German offensive was three-pronged basically here, the 6th Army, the 5th, and the 7th Army down here. But we just managed to outnumber them. Here's the Moose River. Remember, Antwerp is about over here, so they really didn't get close to their goal. Okay, and the headlines were here. The 1st and the 3rd Armies were closing the trap, and things looked pretty good. There were numerous prisoners on both sides. What you really don't hear about is in the very early days of the battle, this was the bloodiest battle fought in World War II by both sides. 30,000 casualties on the German side, roughly that on the Allied side. And these are the German prisoners here. These are the Allied prisoners here. There were many cases of massacres near Malmedy. They would the forces would surrender, they'd raise their hands, and then they would be mowed down by machine gunners in the tanks here. And this occurred on both sides here. You like to think was more on the Nazi side, but history's still out on that. So you have to feed all these people, you have to move them, you have to house them, in addition to all this other, all the other operational things you have to do. Artifacts from the war. This was a bronze plaque that was manufactured in the late 1940s to commemorate the famous battle. Nuts over here, the Germans with their demands on this side and the Americans standing there. This was on eBay. I saw this just for fun. They wanted $6,500 for it.
Oh, wow.
And if you read, this is an authentic letter from this gentleman to his nephew here. And apparently after the war, not the mid-1950s, I think it was. It wasn't that much after the war. The uncle here, the owner of the artifact, was in the region near Malmedy where one of these massacres had occurred. And it was cold, it was the winter time. He was in the woods there, and he found this old wood pile, and he decided to pull some logs out to build a fire. I think he was camping, whatever he was doing. And at the bottom of the wood pile, he found this helmet there. Now, you like to project that, well, it looks like this was a soldier that was killed. Somehow, the ends here, the fragments, are facing outward, so it must have been shot from inside. But in any case, it's an authentic artifact there. And whether the provenance has been proven or not, I just thought it was an interesting memento there from the war. Kathy Feldbush is not here today. Some of you might know Kathy here. She's a volunteer with the Ladies Auxiliary. And my wife and her work together. They're quilters. And I'd mentioned that we were going to talk about the Battle of Bastogne. And she, oh, well, my dad was in there. So I asked her to send me these things. Here, Roy Cummins, private first class. He was in Company I of the 38th Regiment. Lived in Chandler here. Has two daughters. One of them is our very own Kathy Feldbush here. And Mike usually comes to these. He couldn't make it today. Mike is Kathy's friend here. So this is an article. The reenactors recreate the Battle of the Bulge every year. And Kathy's nephew, Kathy's sister's son, went over there for one of the reenactments here. And he wore, Eric Boyles was his name, and his grandfather was this Roy Cummings, and he participated in one of the reenactments, and he actually wore the field jacket that was owned by Roy Cummings, the actual original Battle of the Bulge field jacket here. And it says here, Roy and his unit returned to the States where his young daughters were waiting for him. So Kathy Feldbush is one of those young daughters here. This will be available later if anybody's interested in looking at it. Okay, these are also from Roy Cummings here. These are the original maps. This is a Xerox copy of the original map that shows the route of the 2nd Infantry Division here. They landed in Belfast here and through Swansea, and finally on the 7th of June near Treves here, and then eventually made their way through Amiens and into Germany here, but prior to that they were involved in the Battle of the Bulge near St. Vith here. And here's for scale, here's the port of Antwerp there. So he was right in the middle of the battle. Apparently he had, there was a close hit, so he was knocked out of his foxhole, unconscious. They sent him to a hospital back toward Paris, the interior of France. He recovered just in time to rejoin his unit just before the Battle of the Bulge. So he was actually in it, but he had been recuperating before then. This is a more detailed sketch map of where his unit was. Malmedy is about 6 miles to the west over here. This is pretty much on the eastern side. The Ardennes forest is all around this area here. And a lot of local publicity here. They bagged 78 tanks in a 4-day battle here. And so just they would returned from the battle, and the unit historian would write all these out and take all these notes and finally incorporate everything into a unit history book. Okay, the U.S. 3rd Army, 10th Armored Division. This is another unit that was in Bastogne here under patent. This is a half-track here. It's a vehicle that's got tracks in the back and, of course, the wheels in the front. It carried anything from cargo to weapons and communications, anything in between there. So these are 3 members of the 10th Armored Division over here. This shows their participation in Bastogne and some of the other. Kaiserslautern is in Germany. Garmisch-Partenkirchen is in the south of Germany. And 1st in Patton's 3rd Army in Germany, 1st in Patch's Army in Austria here. So that's the 3rd Armored Division here. Here is the 3rd Army coming up here. Here's the 10th Armored Division. Now, we're going to get into the after the war a little bit later. I had mentioned before that I actually was born there in 1943, and my real father was an American soldier who was killed on the Russian front, but my mother had me, and she met this American soldier, Jack Baker here, who actually was a member of the 10th Armored Division here. That's his patch that I have at home. Now, I don't know that he was actually at the Battle of the Bulge. I do know he was in the 10th Armored Division during this period of time here. So you have Kathy Feldbush's family here, and I'm going to say possibly part of my family also has been involved in that historical time. Okay, victory in the Ardennes. By January the 15th, the Germans had been beaten. The war was almost over. Here, Patton made the front cover of Life magazine here, and I have this issue at home, and everybody's cheering. This is VE Day and so on. Before VE Day, this was the last line of defense here by the Russians here. Part of the 7th Army is attacking Mannheim. Frankfurt is here. Frankfurt and Hanau. I was actually right there at the time while this was going on. Bradley's 12th Army Group, Patton's 3rd Army, they were all coming to the border. They crossed the first bridge on the Rhine at Remagen here, which is a little bit north of Frankfurt. Here, whoops, roughly in this area over here. Okay, yeah, here's Mainz, here's Remagen right here. So that was the first bridge. There was a movie about that here. They actually crossed the Rhine River, and then, of course, the Germans, Hitler committed suicide, and that was essentially over. Yeah, the first French army was reestablished enough to participate here down in the south. Here, the British forces generally attacked from the west, and the Americans had responsibility through the Ardennes here, all the way up to the border of Germany. And this is sort of tragic here. Now, toward the end of the war, they expanded the draft age to 16 to 60. They took away student deferments. They took another look at essential jobs. Here, what they thought were essential maybe weren't so much. They removed soldiers, sailors from the Luftwaffe, which by that time was simply a shell of itself. And they all became fighters here in the war, the last days of of Germany there. Here's the bridge at Remagen. The bridge itself was destroyed, but they built these pontoon bridges, and they were able to move across the river, reestablish a foothold on the other side of the Rhine, and then continue. And that was about March. Here's Winston Churchill crossing the bridge here. It was safe enough to get some of the higher ranking officers over, and you can just see the total destruction here. And after Hitler's suicide, the Reich president, Karl Donitz, ordered General Jodl to accept the terms of surrender. They tried to bargain for some conditional surrender, and Eisenhower wasn't having any of it. He says, no, it's unconditional, or we're walking out of this room and we'll continue the war. Here, so it was unconditional surrender. Okay, VE Day was May the 8th when this took place. The war had gone on for almost 5 years. And here's the Evansville paper here, dated the morning of May the 8th, 1945. Germans. This is the original Queen Elizabeth, converted into a troop carrier. All of the Allies and American troops left Europe and came back. There was no way to feed them there. All the industry had been destroyed, the farmland, everything else. So, and of course, the troops wanted to get home as soon as they possibly could. So they did. I have in the back on the table here, in 1995, the Warwick Enquirer published a 50th anniversary newsletter on World War II. Belongs to Kathy Feldbush. You're welcome to look at it. Please handle it carefully because I don't want her hollering at me. But it showed the veterans here. There are many pages of this. It's not in alphabetical order, but certainly some of you will recognize some of the names and faces there that we see, and I have that laid out back there on the table. Okay, and just again, more VE Day here. Big day, very, very happy. Okay, and so this is the May the 8th, Time magazine. Very happy soldier, oops, standing in front of the swastika there. Okay, so but this is what really is going on the German side here. Here, mass surrender, look at the total destruction, and imagine the people remaining. They got to eat every day, they got to have a place to sleep. It's winter time, it's cold, absolutely no medical care, nothing at all. Here, the people have nothing left. Hitler is dead, the war is over, all the senior leaders are taken prisoner, and they just don't know what's next, what's coming on. Here's some of the children playing in the rubble. These are actual weapons here that these little kids are playing around, and who knows how many live mines and things are going around there. More kids in the rubble walking by, but they're reasonably nicely dressed here. You know what they had left at the time. Okay, and the Americans come in when Germany was partitioned. The German citizens were fearful that they would be in the Soviet zone because the Russians were known to be very brutal and weren't nearly as kind to the population as the British or the Americans were. So here's some American soldiers. I doubt there's a lot of happy faces there, but some of them are. Okay, this is Frankfurt toward the end of the war. This is Mainzer Landstrasse here. That's me on this side. And here's me again. Here's a German soldier walking by on the left over there. So they didn't capture me. A lot of the population did what they could in order to survive, to supplement whatever rations the Allies were able to give them during these hard times. My grandmother set up Veilchen am Opernplatz, violets on the Opera Square. This is in the middle of Frankfurt. And she'd ride her bicycle out, pick the flowers, then come back and sell them to whoever happened to be in downtown Frankfurt there, to shed a little light and happiness, I guess, at that time. We'll talk a little bit about war brides. This ties into the display we have right over here, where I'd mentioned briefly that my mother and her sister, Henny Krantz, who moved to Boonville here back in the 1950s, both of the sisters met American soldiers. Here, Henny married Leo Krantz. Some of you might know Put and Take or the Krantz brothers up in Boonville. Here, they're my cousins. And this is my stepfather, Jack Baker, here of the 10th Armored Division, and that's my mother. And it's my grandmother, Dora. And here's Dora in 1966. Here, I hitchhiked through Europe with my good friend Jerry Meltzer, who was Jewish. And Jerry's grandparents were in Poland during the war. My grandfather and father probably persecuted his family here, and that fact didn't escape us. We were the best of friends. He died in 2018, and I miss him every day. He was the best man at my wedding. But anyway, I took the picture, and here's Jerry with my grandmother. The flower shop had changed a little bit since then. They died in the 70s, and the flower shop is now long gone. Here, the War Bride Act of 1948 was to repatriate a lot of the Allied soldiers who met women there and brought them back to married them, brought them back to the country here. American Overseas Airlines was the forerunner of American Airlines here, and they had a plan. This shows the different stops in there, and they would bring them all the way back to the USA. Here, that's one of the planes coming to New York. This is the passenger manifest here, American Overseas Airlines. The date here is 25th of December, 1948. Here, this is John Baker, Jack Baker, which is my stepfather. This is my mother, Anna Marie Baker. They'd married over there. And I'm still Rolf Seitz down here. So they brought the three of us back in the plane and settled in New Jersey, and then eventually wound up here. So after the war, the nation was divided up into several sectors here. The Soviets controlled the eastern part, Prussia, as what we know as East Germany here, the British, the Northwest here, and the Americans here. Here's Frankfurt right here. So the Americans and the French controlled a little bit of the southwestern portion down there. So to put all this in perspective here, really the beginning of the end was Operation Overlord. The Allies coming in. During August, they advanced from Paris to the Rhine. Operation Market Garden we looked at, that really wasn't successful. It was an effort by Field Marshal Montgomery over here. The Battle of the Bulge begins on the 16th over here. Through many, many individual battles, there's a lot of literature on this. I've read a lot, but between all the histories, all the various units, it's fascinating reading. But essentially, the counterattack began here on the 6th of January, and finally on the 25th of January, it was pretty much over. And then finally, they reached the Rhine in the spring of 1945. Much more to the story here, which we can't possibly cover in this series of lectures here, but we've not said a word about the Holocaust, the extermination of some say 8 million Jews, 6 million Jews. The Nuremberg trials, where all of the senior Nazi leaders were put on trial and in many cases were executed. They paid for what went on during the war. Again, from the ruins, the Allies couldn't let the civilians just suffer and die, so the Marshall Plan came into effect. That pumped in money and supplies and equipment, and it literally rebuilt the economy. You saw the picture of Frankfurt, what it looks like today, and all of that is based originally on the Marshall Plan. And of course, there was the reunification of East and West Germany in 1990, so it's all one nation again. And the last slide here, you can watch TV, you can watch movies, but what you don't realize is exactly what the impact was to our civilization, basically. 15 million people killed, 25 million wounded in battle, 45 million civilians, and so on. I don't have to read all these, but terrible, terrible cost. Okay, and that's the end. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to help. Okay. Mark.
How old were you when you came over here?
48, I was 6. Yeah. So I'll be around for a while. We can chat. Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much. I'm good. Okay. Okay, Tom?
In the Battle of the Bulge, one of the plan was to get it from the Allies. So where did they fall short on that?
Well, there were fuel dumps in various areas. They were able to get that, but on the front lines, the Allies were thin anyway because of the difficulty in getting the fuel from the ports all the way across France.
They didn't have
Under those, yeah, they really didn't have it. What they were able to, they would siphon fuel from vehicles that were broken down on the sides of the road. It was that the Germans would siphon the American fuel in order to let them go. But what I learned mostly in this whole thing was how important this supply chain is. You don't really think about that. But if you don't have the food or the ammunition, you just don't go anywhere. So, okay, thank you very much.